All right. The International Court of Justice is now in session. The Honorable Judge Seung Tae-hong, Charles Sharma, and Chang-hun Lee presiding.
You may sit, please. Good morning to you all. Do you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Good morning to you all. Welcome to the final round of this year's East Asian Regional Rounds of 2021 and 2022 of the Stanson International Environment and Moot Court Competition. Without further ado, let me begin by deciding which side will take the position of applicant and respondent. To secure the fairness of discussion, let me turn to the use of the traditional way of the coin decider. Okay, so if you don't have any objection to this, let's say the face with the picture of a crane will take the position of an applicant, and number will go to the respondent. Okay, all right. So let's say from China, which side would you like to prefer? Face or number?
Thank you, Excellencies. We want to choose the number side.
Number, you mean number, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, number. Automatically, the Yonsei University will go to the choose the face. All right, let's flip a coin and wish you luck. I have the number. Okay, so let's begin with the Southwestern University from China. The load of the applicant. So should we begin without any further arrangement?
Thank you, Your Excellencies. Maybe give me a few seconds. I need to type the timekeeper to tell the timekeeper which specific time we should have. Yeah.
Okay, I give you some time to decide the time allotment.
Excellencies, the applicant is ready. So, should we begin or just wait a minute?
Yeah, I think you need more time. I think we're ready for the proceedings. Let me reiterate the rules of this proceeding. First, each team may present oral argument for 30 minutes. I also given for the applicant, starting with the Wan Yu Ran for 15 minutes and Yijing Liang 30 minutes. Okay, and for the respondent side, the first speaker will be Jiana Song, and second speaker will be Naun Lee. First will be 60 minutes. The second speaker will be given us 40 minutes. Okay, bear those time limits in mind. Without further ado, let's start from the applicant. First. So I give the floor to the applicant, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. President, Your Excellencies. May it please the court. My name is Ran Wanyu, and I'm the agent for applicant, the Federal States of Earr. I will use 15 minutes to address the first issue concerning the actions of Earr with respect to the maintained wetland complex. My co-agent, Liang Yijing, will be addressing the second issue for 30 minutes and remain 2 minutes for rebuttal. The Excellencies, the applicant submits that Earr did not violate any international law. There are two main arguments that the applicants want to make. First, Earr did not violate Ramsar Convention. Second, the prohibition of widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the environment as a result of armed conflict has no binding force on Earr, and no such damage has occurred. First, the actions of Earr did not violate Article 3.1 of Ramsar Convention. According to Article 29 of Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, a treaty is binding on each party irrespective of its entire territory. The maintained wetland complex is within the territory of Rango and outside that of Earr. Even though Earr wanted to promote the conservation of the wetland, as stated in Article 3.1 of Ramsar Convention, it would have no means to regulate the maintained wetland, which is outside its territory.
Well, Council, with the permission.
Oh, yes.
Well, Council, the big question that the court is unclear with is it's not about just your lack of conservation, but it's also your intensive and purposive attacking of the wetlands. It's not that you did not conserve it, but you in fact went out of your way to attack it. So I think there's a distinction in those two issues.
Thank you, Excellencies. I get your question. And actually, the damage of the maintained wetland has occurred, but the applicant submits that this damage should be attributed to Rango. And my following pleadings will just prove this. So may I continue? Thank you. Instead, the responsibility for protecting the maintained wetland should rest with Rango. But Rango failed to do so. According to the clarification, Rango knew the ANPFF had established a camp in the maintained wetland complex. And after ANPFF attacked Earr, causing an actual injury to the lives of the citizens and property of Earr, Rango could foresee that Earr might fight back in self-defense. But at that time, Rango did not warn or expel ANPFF from its sovereign territory, which means that it has acquiesced the permission of ANPFF to use the maintained wetland complex as a camp. Indeed, the maintained wetland was damaged, unfortunately, but this damage should be attributed to Rango because Rango failed to fulfill its obligation under Article 3.2 of Ramsar Convention.
Well, Council,
yes,
according to the ANPFF are initially your citizens, your state citizens. They don't belong to Rango. So to ask them to directly prosecute or in fact take actions against another nation's citizen is a very serious matter in international law. So I don't see how that can be a strong point for you to ask a foreign country to prosecute your own citizen and then find them guilty of something for not doing so.
Thank you, Excellencies. The applicant submits that Rango provided a shelter to ANPFF, which means during the armed conflict, Rango should be considered as the same set of ANPFF. So thus, this armed conflict can be considered as an international armed conflict instead of the civil war of Earr. So, Your Excellencies, the applicant submits that we are just consider this armed conflict as an international one. So the fact to the attack to the maintained wetland was just the self-defense from Earr. Your Excellencies, so if I have answered your question, may I just continue my pleadings?
Please proceed.
Thank you. And the damage should be attributed to Rango. Since 2014, fixed tent drought was affected the ecological character of maintained wetland complex. But Rango did not submit a report to inform the Ramsar Secretariat about its change in the ecological character. The dry climate was the driving factor for the fires, and fire was the direct factor for the damage of the wetland. Thus, the lack of accountability of Rango is the cause of wetland damage. To sum up, Earr did not violate the Ramsar Convention, and the damage of maintained wetland should be attributed to Rango. Then, turn to my second submission.
Council, just before you go there,
yes,
I would just like to clarify the exact thing that you have stated here in this court. You have basically given a state a free immunity in case of any territorial infringement and attacking to another state's environment. And under the guise of self-defense. Is there any international law, any case where this court has found such sweeping powers for a state to exercise such right?
Thank you, Excellencies. The applicants would like to submit a case, that is the September 11 attack. The United States attacked back at Afghanistan for shouting the Taliban. The international community recognized that the United States was exercising its self-defense and did not consider the United States attack was a violation of the sovereignty or some other of Afghanistan.
Counsel, I'm not sure if that case would be comparable here for various reasons. Firstly, the Taliban are not part of the US. They were not a US citizen. Okay, they were a completely external country, well, kind of like a de facto or de jure. There's doubts on that, but anyway, there was an established government in Afghanistan, and there was enough evidence to suggest that there may have been backing of the Taliban in these attacks. However, in this case, the people who are attacking NPFF are your citizens. So again, I'm not entirely sure if the precedent set by that can be applicable here.
Thank you, Excellencies. Actually, the Taliban is the terrorist because it was the use the unlawful violence and intimidation against such civilians to the United States. And as for the freedom fighters here, it is just a political, it has its political goal, but the applicants just want to clarify that in the, during the international community, such distinguish between the terrorists and freedom fighters not so such clarified, because the terrorist is generally defined by the domestic law, such as the PLO is on the United States terrorist list, but the other states consider it as a freedom fighters. So the applicant permits its case to submit this case, just want to give advice or subsidiary for the courts. And if the courts just think this case cannot be similar with the current case, the applicant would like to just consider that. Yeah, thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Then turns to some second submission. The applicant submits that the prohibition of widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the environment as a result of armed conflict has no binding force on Earr, and no such damage has occurred. Firstly, this prohibition is not binding on Earr because Earr is not a party to the treaties which include such prohibition, and it has not risen to the level of customary international law. This prohibition is contained in Article 35.3 and 55.1 of Additional Protocol 1. But Earr and Rongo are not state parties to the Additional Protocol 1. In this regard, the United States, France, and other countries had made reservations when signing the convention, believing that wording should only apply to the parties to Additional Protocol 1. As for whether this prohibition is international customary law, we need to look at its historical developments and current situation. In the 1993 report on the establishment of the SCTY, the UN Secretary General Annan did not classify Additional Protocol 1 as part of those conventional international humanitarian laws, which will undoubtedly become customary international law. The 2000 Secretary Council resolution distinguished between the Geneva Convention and its additional protocols. In other words, this prohibition does not bind the non-contracting states. According to the U.S. Department of Defense report, Conduct of Persian Gulf War, the United States refused to recognize the customary international law status of these two articles and consider them as merely two clauses in treaty law. In the advisory opinion on the legality of the treaty and use of nuclear weapons, ICJ states that Article 35.3 and 55 have binding force effects on the all states which have signed them, implied that it considers these two articles to be treaty law only. Objectively speaking, as two elements of customary law, general practice and opinion juries are not met because the United States, Iraq, France, and the United Kingdom had not signed additional Protocol 1. This prohibition has not risen to the level of customary international law. Secondly, even if this prohibition can be applied, the damage does not meet the requirement of widespread, long-term, and severe. It's difficult to find a specific definition of these three keywords in the text of additional Protocol 1 or even in the relevant notes. But according to the negotiation record of additional Protocol 1, widespread means the extent or area affected. However, it does not provide the further clarification on its exact scope, and it only indicates that severe means a serious and harmful result for human beings. It's considered to be severe if it causes damage to the human life and health. The armed conflict did not kill any human except for the AMP freedom fighters, which means it is not a severe damage. The use of words "and" as a link of three keywords that such environmental damage is only prohibited if the widespread, long-term, and severe meets the requirements at the same time. Apparently, not all the definition of these three keywords did damage means. So in conclusion, Earr's action to mention wetland complex did not violate any international law because it did not violate Ramsar Convention and did not violate the prohibition, which has not risen to the level of international customary law. Your Excellencies, if there is no further question, may I conclude my pleadings. Thank you, Your Excellencies.
Yeah.
Since there is no further question, my time has expired. I will invite my co-agent to continue her pleadings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Excellencies. My name is Liang Yijing, the co-agent for applicant. I will be addressing the second issue next. It's about that Rango violated international law as a result of the proposed hotel development in the skilled coastal wetland. The first submission is that Rango violated Ramsar Convention. Firstly, the skilled coastal wetland remains on the list of wetlands of international importance, and I will call it the list next. And if Rango argues it's not on the list, Rango would violate the basic conditions of Article 2.5 of Ramsar Convention, which stipulates that deleting a wetland from the list requires effectively informing the organization or government responsible for the continued bureau duties. In view of the fact that the sovereignty of Kimchi Island has been discussed separately, we only submit that Kimchi Island is under the jurisdiction of Rango, and the skilled coastal wetland remains on the list. And
Counsel, can you please repeat that? Did you say the Kempke Island is under the jurisdiction of Rango?
yeah, we submit that.
Okay, so you don't think it is your territory anymore?
No. It's a sovereignty problem and it's not the jurisdiction. We submit that the actual jurisdiction was under the Rungos, but the sovereignty problem we will be submitted to other courts. We only discuss the environmental problem under this court.
I understand.
We must do.
So basically the control or the sovereignty is still with you, but the control lies with them.
Yeah, based on that, we can to argue that the other violation of Rungos.
Okay, thank you.
And secondly, we submit Rungo violated Article 3.1 of Ramsar Convention. Under these articles, contracting parties agree to formulate and implement their planning so as to promote the conservation of the white lines included in the list, and as far as possible, the wise use of white lines in their territory. The conference of the parties adopted a definition at its third meeting in Regina, Canada in 1987. This definition was revised in 2005 in Resolution 9.1 Annex A, which could be referred as subsidiary means according to Article 38.1 of ICJ statute. Its original text was as follows: wise use of white lines is the maintenance of their ecological character, achieved through the implementation of ecosystem approaches within the context of sustainable development. According to the guidelines for the implementation of the wise use concept developed by the wise use group, working group established at Regina, that means to achieve a balance between development of human and nature. However, during the whole establishment of the hotel project, the permit would allow the use of spotlights in the hotel complexes, such as balconies, stairways, parking lots, restaurants, and marina. This scale is utterly inconsistent with the Ramsar Convention and brings harms to the turtles, violating necessity of the principle of proportionality. Of course, in this case, we submit that the EIA was violated in procedural way, but it can't to prove that. But it can't to mean that Rungo did not violate the wise use principle, because this article states that the failure of the contracting parties to achieve the actual effect constitutes a violation. It's not a matter of procedural legality, but it's a matter of substantial obligations. Actually, there were many countries in the world that also rely on turtles for tourism that do not need to harm them. The turtle base in Bali, Indonesia, for example, is built at a distance from the resort and the hotels, and people need to visit it only by boat. And there's also another instance, the original host NGO has suggested that the protection of sea turtles in Lebanon can be achieved by reducing the intensity of light and replacing white lines with red lines.
Well, Council,
Please?
just to clarify, okay?
Yeah.
Your contention is only in regard to their building not being in a wise use of their resources, right? That's the only contention that you're bringing up, because essentially you've said that the control of the Kempke Island belongs to respondent, even though sovereignty lies with you. So we don't go on that issue in the first place. We only talk about wise use now. Now, if you're talking about wise use, they have the ability to use it, and now we are talking about whether they did appropriate measure or not, whether they could have taken alternative measure. That's where we are. They have conducted an EIA, have they not? So in that sense, they have fulfilled their obligation under international law to take precaution, in a sense, to go ahead with this building. So what is the problem? What is the big issue here?
Yeah, that's what I'm submitting now. Is of course we submit that the EIA was violated and legal as legal in the procedural law, and it's also fits their domestic law, whatever. However, this wide use principle is about the substantial obligation, and they actually hurt the environment and the turtles at a substantial extent. And we also want to let our your excellencies to know that there are so many other better choices they can. They can only to remove this hotel complex a little, just behind it, just beside it, but instead of building it just in this white line.
Council, that's their sovereign right. As a country, they have the right to build it wherever they want. What authority or jurisdiction does this court have to tell them, don't build it there, build it somewhere else, because they have complied with the law? So that is what the court is curious about, because we are not sure of what you're asking for the court and whether we do have the jurisdiction and the authority to provide such a remedy.
The core point we submit is that only they take these actions, but these actions is not an accident. International environmental law requires them to do, and they also have the right to build the hotel anywhere. But the international environmental law argues that they have to obey their obligations under
which is
the
to conduct an EIA, which they have done. Precisely my point.
May I understand your question clearly?
So they have international environmental law only talks about them to conduct a proper EIA, which they have done, and they have taken measures to fix or amend the problems that they found out through that EIA. So what more could you possibly ask from the respondents in a legal sense? That's what we are seeking.
Yeah, the EIA was a problem, but the wise use principle we consider is another problem. Wise use requires them to do some actual effective protection, and we can
you please read the wise use
do
principle that you're stating here? Because I don't think it urges that kind of obligation on them.
Yeah, if the courts to consider this, we also obey this result. And we only to submit our submissions about the substantial obligations of the Orongo. So if these questions I submitted it clearly, may I to turn to my next submission?
Okay, you could, okay.
Yeah, and for the next, the Orongo we submit violates the Ramsar Convention, and the next submission is about the Inter-American Convention for the Protection and Conservation of Sea Turtles, which we called it IAC. And in this submission, we submit that first, Orongo violated IAC Article 4.2 C and D. The restriction of the human activities and the use of sea turtle habitats and nesting areas is stipulated under those articles. As a contracting party, Orongo should comply with the above restrictions by not carrying out unreasonable economic construction that would bring irreversible harm to the survival of sea turtles. And the next is about the IAC Annex 2. IAC Annex 2 provides further guidance pertaining to the location and the design of buildings. It's more specific. in sea turtle nesting areas. It requires measures to regulate the use of areas where sea turtles nest or regularly occur. And after that, although the shade screens or the window tinting in the windows and the glass doors facing the beach will be installed to block interior lights. The use of spotlights in hotel complex, other places, was actually to have the negative effect on the turtles, where the turtles actually nest or regularly occur. And Rongo did not have any evidence that its actions to regulate it, which definitely violated the requirement of IAC Annex 2. And may I, in my conclusion, we submit that Rongo.
Before you conclude, may I pose one question concerning your statement? You're saying that you acknowledge that Rongo has taken certain measures under the IAC because we believe that IAC does not prohibit any construction efforts, and it's their sovereign rights in a way. And so, is it enough that environmental impact assessment was enough under the rule of the IAC? So, in procedure-wise, they have completed their initial obligations. So, how do you see that they should have done more, or IAC does not prevent them from building those hotels as long as they take the certain measures?
Yeah, my time has expired. Can I answer this question just for 1 minute? It's a rule, so I request you.
All right, it's allowed.
Okay, thank you. About this question, we submit that the accent about the ERA to regulate it was also technological problem. In their ERA, they may provided some ways to keep the accent in their restrictions, but also just as I just mentioned, we also can provide some other better choices to avoid these risks. The point is that they have to take these risks, or they can just avoid it. That's our point. We provided there easily some other better choices that other countries do, other countries did, and it had some positive effect, but they cannot to just use it. So these risks we submit is never necessary risks to take. That's our point. Thank you for your question. Excellencies again.
Thank you. So the time for the applicant is up. Now, let me turn to the respondent. Should we begin without any further delay, right? Okay, floor is yours.
Excellencies, my name is Gina Song, and alongside my co-counsel Nan Lee, we hereby represent Rongo, or respondent, before this court. I will be addressing the first issue of this case, and Ms. Lee will address the second issue. Your Excellencies, Menhit Wetland Complex, hereafter referred to as Menhit, is a Ramsar site, or a wetland of international importance that is known for its biodiversity. As a Ramsar site, it is the international community's duty to its natural environment. However, with regard to its artillery attack on Menhit, applicant has committed a gross violation of international law that has infringed upon respondents' sovereignty and devastated the natural environment of this valuable. That said, the respondent following submissions. First, applicant breached respondents' territorial integrity and international humanitarian law, or IHL. Applicant violated international environmental law. Applicant breached respondent's sovereignty through illegitimate use of force. UN Charter Article 2.4 prohibits illegitimate use of force against another state as it violates the state's territorial integrity and political independence. Furthermore, the principle of self-defense does not justify applicant's attack. When a non-state actor's attack was not caused by its host state, the principle of self-defense in Article 51 of the UN Charter cannot justify infringing upon the sovereignty of the host state. In other words, the initial attack of ANPFF was not attributable to respondents, and thus the principle of self-defense cannot justify violating the territorial sovereignty of respondents. In the cases, legal consequences of the construction of a wall in the occupied Palestinian territory and armed activities on the territory of the Congo, the ICJ concluded that an attack by a non-state actor in another state's territory not justify because the initial attack is not attributable to the host. Consequently, the principle of self-defense cannot be justified in this case. Moreover, even if attacks by ANPFF could trigger self-defense, applicants' attacks cannot be under IHL. IHL regulates the conduct of parties engaged in under the principle of necessity and proportionality, as well as the principle of distinction and widespread, long-term, and severe damage. The principles of necessity and proportionality are delineated in the Nicaragua case and the oil platforms case. These principles are well established under customary international law. First, applicants' unilateral, uninformed attack violates the principle of necessity. States' use of self-defense requires 3 criteria: the existence of armed attack, the intentionality, and leaving no other choice of action. Applicant clearly had an alternative to the use of force: consultation and cooperation with respondent, which was not conducted, making applicants' actions unlawful. Second, applicant's attack violated the principle of distinction of civilian objects by indiscriminate use of explosive weapons. The principle of distinction prohibits states from targeting civilian populations or objects, as well as using weapons incapable of distinction. According to the ICRC's customary international humanitarian law, all parts or elements of the natural environment are civilian objects unless some become military objectives.
Well, Counsel, why should we consider ICRC's opinions on this matter at this court?
Yes, Your Excellency. Although the ICRC's opinion may not be legally binding, it provides a framework for us to understand the principle of distinction. Thus, the respondent believes—
Principle of distinction. Why should this court consider principle of distinction? We're not at the ICC, we're at the ICJ.
Yes. However, the principle of distinction can be considered because there was a military objective of the ANPFF camp, and there was a civilian object, which is the environment of Menhit wetland complex. As such,
that leads me to the next question. How do we characterize the Menhit wetland as a civilian object?
Menhit wetland complex is a civilian object as
stated by the ICRC. And again, my question becomes, why should we consider the ICRC?
Yes, Your Excellency. One moment, please. You should consider the ICRC's opinion because ICRC states that this principle is customary international law, and thus—
That's what the ICRC states in their customary international humanitarian law, like their book. Is it considered the same way by the ICJ?
It may not be considered the same way as the ICJ. However, the respondent believes that it is customary international law, and thus we should consider the principle of distinction in this case.
Well, customary international law requires opinio juris and state practice. Can you identify any state practice where these issues have been considered? Or in fact, let's make it even broad, where the ICJ has considered the ICRC's opinions. Is there any precedent of that happening in this court?
Your Excellency, I'm sorry to say that the ICJ has not considered the ICRC's customary international humanitarian law in its judgment. However, it could be a potential source in future decisions.
Under where can it be a source of law? What are the sources of law which the court can consider? Where does ICRC's opinion fall?
It can be a supporting opinion and an opinion that people can consider. However, it is not a legally binding decision.
Under 38, Article 38, there are certain sources of law. Where will that fall under?
Your Excellency, which article is this?
Under the sources of law that the ICJ can consider in the ICJ Charter Article 38, there are 4 listings: treaties, customs, general principles of law, and opinions of highly qualified jurists. Where would this fall under?
This would fall under the opinions of the, yes.
Thank you. Please proceed.
See? Applicant's attack on Manhit is disproportionate as it led to immense collateral damage. When a state uses force in response to an armed attack, the measure shall be proportional to the initial attack. Even if an attack was not targeted at civilians, there is opinio juris and state practice that considers collateral civilian casualties in measuring proportionality. In this case, this implies that the immense collateral damage, destruction of 800 square kilometers of the peat swamp, is disproportionate to the military gain of preventing ANPFF from continuing small-scale drone attacks. Fourth, the prohibition of widespread and long-term severe damage to the natural environment during armed conflict is considered customary international law according to Rule 45 of ICRC's Customary International Humanitarian Law. Damage caused by applicant's attack crosses the widespread, long-term, and severe defined in the ENMOD Convention and preparatory works of 1977 additional protocols. ICRC guidelines also define severe damage as the disruption or damage to an ecosystem, and this applies to the irreparable ecological loss inflicted on Manhit. According to these grounds, applicant violated respondent's national sovereignty and IHL with respect to its artillery attack on Manhit by resorting to illegitimate use of force, unjustified as self-defense, and attacking
Excuse me,
Your Excellency.
Yes, can I ask you, mentioned that you mentioned the 1977 additional protocol, but as far as the court is concerned, and both your side is not a party to this additional protocol. So how do you continue to claim that it governs the rulings of this court today?
Yes, Your Excellency.
And second is, as far as the court is informed, the commander has conducted a standard proportionality analysis and determined the expected accidental damage to the civilians beforehand. So is enough to have the procedure-wise to some precautions?
First, Your Excellency, the agent would like to respond to the first question. Given that prevention of widespread, long-term, and severe damage is customary international law, a respondent believes it is appropriate to refer to existing legal documents to configure the objective standards of this obligation that reflects the general state practice. Therefore, although respondent and applicant is not parties to the additional protocols, the respondent invoked these used these treaties so that we can configure an objective standard regarding widespread, long-term, and severe damage. Next, proceeding to the second question about proportionality analysis, the agent believes that the proportionality analysis was insufficient. Applicants should have taken feasible precautions other than the proportionality analysis to minimize the damage to civilian objects, such as the environment, as stated in the Law of Armed Conflict Principles. Nevertheless, there is no evidence that applicants has fulfilled obligations in the proportionality analysis. May I direct Your Excellency's attention to paragraph 25 of the record. Regarding the proportionality analysis, there is no mention that applicants have precautionary measures. Thus, it cannot be said that they have conducted a sufficient proportionality analysis, Your Excellencies. Moving forward, Your Excellencies, applicant has breached its obligations toward the environment under the no harm rule, which is customary international law. Will obligate states to prevent, regarding transboundary environmental harm, and this is specified in Principle 21 of the Stockholm Declaration and Principle 2 of the Rio Declaration by recognizing states' responsibility to prevent their jurisdictional activities from causing damage to the environments of other areas outside their national jurisdiction. In the advisory opinion of the legality of the threat or use of nuclear weapons, the ICJ affirms that environmental concerns must be considered even in armed conflict. Additionally, pulp mills on the River Uruguay establishes due diligence obligation, requiring states to adopt and enforce adequate regulations and measures to prevent significant transboundary environmental damage.
Council.
Yes, Your Excellency.
Just on that point,
Yes.
particularly on transboundary harm, in probably the cases that you mentioned, the transboundary harm originates from a certain country, and then by the means of rivers or airspace or something like gases or something, all these pollutants go over to the other country and cause harm. So it is more to do with that. Rather, here, does the same principle of transboundary harm apply in this particular case? Because this is not exactly similar situation.
Excellency, this might not seem like a similar situation, but it is similar in that there was transboundary harm in that the armed attacks by Earr triggered a wildfire that caused harm, environmental damage to Manhattan wetland complex. And there is a direct causal relationship between the environmental damage and the artillery attack, because because of the conditions of Manhattan wetland complex, which are inundated throughout most of the year, according to paragraph 14 of the record. And thus, the agent believes that this transboundary harm principle also applies in this case. Forward, Your Excellency. Additional pulp mills on the River Uruguay establishes, I'm sorry, Your Excellency. Applicants do not practice due diligence in implementing measures of prevention of environmental harm despite its awareness of the objectively established environmental risks. Hence, for both approaches of preventing actual harm and keeping its obligation of due diligence, applicant breached the no harm principle. Moving on to the next point, further, applicant has reached its environmental treaty obligations with respect to the Ramsar Convention and the Convention on Biological Diversity. Applicant has violated the third article of the Ramsar Convention. Article 3.1 of the convention requires applicant to promote the conservation of wetlands included in the list. However, applicant's attack is a breach of this duty because it inflicted large-scale damage that resulted in widespread loss of fauna and flora, hindering biological diversity. Furthermore, applicant's attack even changed the ecological character of Manhattan. A change in ecological character of wetlands is defined as the human-induced adverse alteration of any ecosystem component, process, and/or ecosystem benefit or service. Respondent estimates it would take decades, if not over a century, for the region to recover. Thus, sufficient evidence establishes that Manhattan's ecological character changed from the attack, and this constitutes. As a result, applicant breached Article 3 of the Ramsar Convention. In addition, applicant Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD. First, it violated Article 3 of the CBD, which delineates the responsibility that their activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to the environment of other states or of areas beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. Article 3 is a binding article of international agreement. Time has elapsed. Agent would like to conclude her remarks. Thank you, Your Excellencies.
May I begin with my submissions, Your Excellencies?
Yes, proceed.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Your Excellencies, my name is Nan Lee, the co-agent appearing on behalf of the respondent to address the second question actions of the respondent with regards to the proposed has violated international law. To contextualize the agent's submission, if we may look at the record, the government of Rongo has agreed to not allow the construction of the hotel until the ICJ issues its final judgment. Moreover, no action has been taken by the Ramsar Secretariat upon Anher's submission of Article 3.2, report about the formation of a Ramsar advisory mission. Agent also wishes to address the fact that the proposed hotel complex occupies only 6% of the Skul coastal wetland, whereas Anher's attack on Menhit changed the ecological character of 64% of the Ramsar site.
Council, why is that relevant? Can we
The
justify
reason-
your wrongdoings based on potentially their wrongdoings?
Your Excellency, that is not the case why the agent has mentioned this point. The agent has mentioned this point to address the fact that there is inconsistencies within Anher about its about how it perceives the non-conservation of the Ramsar site, because its action reflect otherwise of what the applicant side is talking about, the respondent's non-conservation of a Ramsar site.
Well, perhaps the impact of the 6% affected and 70 or 80% affected is different, because in your case, there is a species conservation that is directly at risk. So no such evidence have been talked about in the Menhit wetland cases.
Your Excellency, the agent believes that because no substantive harm has occurred at this point because of the respondent's hotel construction case, however, for the applicant, its attacks have caused a very long forest fire and have negatively impacted the forestry of the Menhit Ramsar site, believes that has more substantive impacts to the Ramsar site of Rongo. The agent will proceed. In this oral submission, it is for this court to consider whether a hotel complex with the purpose of ecotourism that has undergone an environmental impact assessment and is currently placed under a voluntary moratorium is a violation under international law. In this oral submission, the agent will divide the issue into two assumptions in order to focus on the discussion of international environmental law rather than the contentions surrounding the sovereignty of Kempi. The first assumption is that the respondent is the proper sovereign over Kempi, and the second assumption is that the applicant has sovereignty over Kempi. Under the first assumption, the agent will argue that the hotel development proposal is not a violation of international law, as first, the respondent believes that Skul coastal wetland was no longer a Ramsar site, and second, even if it were to be a Ramsar site, there has been no breach of international law because it was in accordance with Article 2.3 and Article 3.1 of the Ramsar Convention, Article 4.3 and the second annex of the Inter-American Convention on Turtles, and Article 3 and 14 of the Convention on Biological Diversity. In regards to the second assumption, Your Excellencies, there has been no breach in international law by the respondent, as Anher's claims can only be premature at best at this point in time. Moreover, the respondent's actions abide by international law since it is the occupying power of Kemki as recognized by Anher and the conducting party of the hotel project. Lastly, Rongo is devoted to act in accordance with the stipulation of the bilateral agreement of 1898. To that end, the agent will first submit to the court that Rongo does not inherit any obligation attached to the territory of Kempi regarding its territorial integration because international law is ultimately built on the foundation of state consent. Rongo has never consented to the designation of the Skul coastal wetland as a Ramsar site, and it has not submitted any necessary documentation for its designation. The clean slate theory, adopted by the Vienna Convention on Succession of States in respect of treaties, allows a new territorial entity to adopt only those treaties it wishes to be bound by and to reject others except for boundary treaties, treaties relating to the use of or restrictions upon territory for the benefit of another state, or for the establishment of foreign military bases upon the territory. The relevance of the clean slate theory has been illustrated in the 9th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Wetlands, hereupon COP, when it discussed the accession of Azerbaijan and its designation of Chizr-Agag Bay, with a smaller area being specified than that of the Kirov Bay's Ramsar site listed by the former Soviet Union. In this case, it determined that it is the sovereign right of the present contracting party to determine which areas will designate as a Ramsar site.
Council, I am aware of that example. However, isn't this a little bit different? Because in that case, we're talking about whether a certain site has to be listed or not is an issue of a new state. Whereas here we are talking about an existing Ramsar site, a site that has already been listed in the convention as a Ramsar site, and whether it maintains that status or not. Isn't there
Yes,
a
Sir,
difference in
Excellency.
those two aspects?
Yes, Your Excellency. The agent is aware of the slight differentiation of the present case to the example given, but the agent still believes that the case applies because Ramsar Resolution 820 asserts that in keeping with Article 2.3 of the Ramsar Convention, the determination of national interests mentioned in Article 4.2 lies solely with the contracting party, and in light of this interpretation, the agent believes that the exercising of its right to change entries in the list, which includes the listing or the delisting of the
Correct.
site.
So that delisting has not yet occurred. Your country has not delisted the Scoot wetlands. So as of that, from this court's point of view, that is a protected wetland, since the delisting has not occurred. So it is on the list of the Ramsar site.
Yes, Your Excellency. The site has not been delisted at this point, but the point that the agent is trying to make is that the Rongo does not recognize this status as of the Scoot wetland as a Ramsar site, but will also proceed on her
But
other
aren't you
submission.
party to the Ramsar Convention?
Yes, Your Excellency.
And it is a Ramsar site.
Yes.
So what difference does it make if you say, oh, we don't recognize a particular wetland or that wetland or this wetland? If you're part of the convention and the convention says that is a Ramsar site, it is a Ramsar site. And you're
Yes, Your
part of that
Excellency.
convention.
Yes, Your Excellency. The agent recognizes that point, but in light of the interpretation of Article 3.1 of the Ramsar Convention, the Ramsar Convention Article 3.1 requires states to conserve the Ramsar sites within its territory and only implies a very general obligation upon states to protect the Ramsar site outside of its territory. And in light of the recognition of Article 2.3
Well,
of the
Council, this is under the assumption that you listed, the first assumption that Rongo has sovereignty over Kempki. This is under that part of your argument. So that argument that you say may be applicable for if you assume and her has sovereignty, but right now you are claiming the assumption that Rongo has sovereignty. So in that case, I don't think that argument would apply.
The agent would like to first recognize that it has its actions within the Ramsar site has been in compliance with the wise use stipulated in the Ramsar Convention, regardless of its. So would like to proceed on to her next point about even if the Scoot coastal wetland was to be a Ramsar site, it has still acted in compliance with the international law.
Please proceed. Thank you.
Even if, Your Excellencies, the respondent were to recognize the Scoot coastal wetland as a Ramsar site, Rongo has acted in compliance with the Ramsar Convention under Article 2.3 and Article 3.1. The Article 2.3 of the Ramsar Convention allows member states to freely decide how to use the wetland, and Article 3.1 stipulates the wise use of the Ramsar site. The sovereign rights of the contracting party of the Ramsar Convention remain intact, which means that the Rongo's plans to develop the Scoot coastal wetland should not concern her as long as it constitutes as wise use specified in Article 3.1 of the same convention. And Rongo views that its conduct of an EIA and commitment to accommodate the suggested window tinting treatment is a clear testament that the proposed hotel project suffices as wise use. The 2002 IUCN report on strategies for wise use of wetlands brings up the case of utilization and economic valuation of the Yala swamp wetland in Kenya. The report states that the use of a wetland important for diversity is encouraged when the economic valuation based upon the use value of the various products of wetland is low. Different activities relevant to the various values of wetlands in support of human economic systems would include fisheries, hunting, agriculture, fuel, etc. However, in paragraph 17 of the record, it dictates that the school coastal wetland only includes beaches, marshes, salty freshwater lagoons, and mangroves, all commodities that fail to provide intrinsic subsistence for the residents of Kemki. Hence, the agent believes that the additional developments, such as the hotel construction proposal, will ensure wise use and adequate human development. Moreover, such actions are in compliance with the Ramsar Resolution 11.9 and 13.24, which encourages states to avoid, mitigate, and compensate for wetland losses. For the case in hand, scientific evidence warrants the reduction of visible light to less than 40% through the installation of shade screens and tinted windows. And in response to the applicant's concern for the case of spotlights, evidence shows that such spotlights emit only 1/6 of the lumens of interior lights used for bedrooms, and spotlights operate with an on and off switch, which will only be used for safety purposes during the nighttime. As a result, the respondent believes that the EIA warrants Rongo's agreement with the objectives under both resolutions. The respondent also stresses the fact that the Ramsar Convention and its resolution only take a soft approach to the protection of wetlands of international importance. This means that even in the unlikely case where the respondent has failed to abide by obligations under the Ramsar Convention, the applicant has an uphill battle to prove actual breaches of the convention's provisions. The respondent will also like to claim that in terms of the Inter-American Convention on Turtles, Article 4.3 talks about the consideration of socio-economic characteristics. And the economic subsistence needs of the traditional communities needs to be addressed in this case. Under IEC Article 4.3b, it states that economic subsistence measures should first generate cash flow and should be undertaken by the traditional community. And the agent believes that because the hotel complex has been proven by previous cases to be an effective and flourishing form of ecotourism, and the record shows that the respondent's country is in very deep consideration of the Rongoan ethnic Rongoans in Kemki, with his conduct of a social media campaign in concern for their self-determination, believes that the economic subsistence provided by the hotel construction abides by the IEC articles. The agent will now move on to the time consideration of how the agent's actions is still abiding by international law, even if the sovereignty were to be of Kemki. As mentioned, the claimant's allegations can only be premature at best because there's no absolute ground for Earr to claim compensation when no measurable harm has occurred. Second, the Kemki people have the right to develop their lands with the help of Rongo, because the fourth convention, Article 4, gives the for the respondent to be a legitimate state authority as the occupied power as recognized by Earr. And fourthly, Rongo is devoted to abiding by the bilateral agreement, Your Excellencies, and the UN Charter warrants specific conditions for the self-determination of the indigenous people to be protected, and Rongo is coming to do this through this hotel project, and believes that regardless of who the sovereign state is in the region, it is abiding international law. As the time has elapsed, with that, I conclude my submissions, Your Excellencies. It has been an honor arguing before this court.
Thank you, respondent. Since we have 2 minutes for the
Thank you, Excellencies.
rebuttal, right? So
yes,
proceed.
Thank you, Excellencies. In response to the respondent, applicant would like to submit 4 brief arguments. First, respondents considered the ANPFF as a non-state actor. However, Rongo shared ANPFF, and thus, this armed conflict should be considered as an international one. And second, this argument will respond to the not causing transboundary harm. No matter Earr's attack meets the requirement of not causing transboundary harm or not, this customer law cannot apply in this case because not to cause transboundary harm applies in peacetime. When it's in the armed conflict footing, IHL prevail upon the customary law because lex specialis derogate generally. And third, Earr is complied with IHL because the main hint is a legitimate military target. The civil target can be easily converted into the military target because of its own use. The main hint complex is used as a camp of the AMPFF, so it is a military target. A proportionality is sufficient because the damage and any damage should be attributed to the wrong goal. And there is no evidence to prove that our proportionality analysis is insufficient. And fourth, Earr do not violate CBD because it applies in the peacetime as the same regard as the transboundary harm. That is all our rebuttal. So thank you.
Thank you for the applicant and respondent for your hard work and the good proposal of your point to the court. We duly consider your good projections today, and the should I say end of the proceeding? Yes. Right. This wraps up the final round of the moot court competition for this Asian regional round. And thank you for your hard work. And I hope that you could make the final round in state. And the thank you for your time. Wishing you all good luck. Thank you. Good at it.
Excellence.